Got it. Hello, Chamai Waka. I see folks, attendees joining. Excited to have you all with us. Hello out there in Zoom land. We'll just give folks a couple more minutes to stream on. And I'm so excited for this conversation. We've been really looking forward to this. We've been looking forward to all of our Sarrsa times as of late, but this one in particular. So I'll go ahead and get started. So Chamai, Koyana, for coming to our most recent installment of our occasional series called Sarrsa Time, or Tea Time in Yupik. I'm Alicia Townsbane, Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Foundation, formerly the BB&C Education Foundation. And before we get started, we always begin with a land acknowledgement. We thank the Alutiiq Sugpiaq, Dena'ina Tenaina, Yupik Yupiaq people of Bristol Bay. We also would like to recognize the Dena'ina of the Eklutna and Knik tribes whose lands the Bristol Bay Foundation reside on, in what we now call Anchorage. We recognize the thousands of years of stewardship, and we acknowledge the people of our region and the people of Anchorage as they continue to be the caretakers of this land. So, Koyana. We also want to let folks know, of course, who funds our foundation and this Sarrsa Time experience. So Sarrsa Time has been made possible in part by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Sustaining Humanities through the American Rescue Plan, in partnership with the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. We are so grateful for this support. But ATLM also likes us to remind folks that any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed during this session does not necessarily represent the views of ATLM or the National Endowment of the Humanities. So good housekeeping in order. And I'll talk about our topic, but maybe before I get there, I just wanted to remind folks about some technical items. We are trying out the Zoom webinar technology. If you are an attendee today, your camera and microphone are automatically off. So please feel free to go about your day and your work. You're not going to disturb us. But we also want to interact with you if you would like. So you can ask questions in a few ways. There's a Q&A section at the bottom. There's also the chat. We tried this last time, and I think the chat is easier, but you can make your own decision. There's also, you can also raise your hand, technically, I think, but maybe the chat is the best way for us to interact with folks if they have questions. We're also recording today's session, and we'll plan to put it out on our YouTube channel. And also advertise that on Facebook. So if you want to go back and re-listen, or you want to share this with a friend, we encourage you to do so. And that will be on our YouTube channel, which is Bristol Bay Foundation. All right. Our topic today is kind of a continuing conversation that we are having with the foundation, and these talks around blood quantum and Native identity and how we form those things. We think that this is a critical issue for our community, particularly as our regional corporations, our village corporations start to consider enrollment of our Alaska Native descendants. And it's also critical for us as we consider how to include this next generation of leaders in our communities in Bristol Bay. And that's why we have asked these three amazing guests to come on, because they represent those things. Descendants, and I consider you all leaders in your own right already. And we're really interested in what you have to say on this topic. So the way that it's going to work for the rest of this session, which we've planned to be about 90 minutes, but the time is yours to use as you see fit, is that I'm actually going to step up. I'm not going to facilitate. And we've asked Harmony Weiner to do that for us today. She's so graciously agreed to do so. So thank you very much. Harmony. And I think you have some interesting conversation prompts for this group. And I think that's all the things I needed to do. So I'm going to say Koyana and to hand it over to you, Harmony. Oh, and one other thing for participants. If you're getting a view where you're seeing a bunch of black boxes, if you go up to the view at the top of the screen, you can change your view to hide non-video participants, and that will give you a cleaner screen where just the presenters are on the panel. So I think that's it. And I'm going to hand it over to you for real this time, Harmony.
Okay, Koyana, Alicia. Yeah, I guess we can just start off with some introductions on this topic and to ourselves, and kind of orient who we are in our relation to the region. So I can kick that off. I really enjoyed how Dr. Worrell broke down Native identity into three different categories. And the first one was social and cultural. And so mine, I'll start off with saying Waka Winaka Sugak, Kasatun Harmony Jade Wainer, Naknik Amiunga. So my Yupik name is Sugak. My English name is Harmony Jade. And I'm from Naknik Native Village. I'm the daughter of Paul and Rhonda Wainer, the granddaughter of Betty Bonin, great-granddaughter of Violet Wilson, and Agnes Estrada. I grew up set netting in Naknik and learned how to cut fish with my grandma. So I feel like subsistence is the way I feel the most connected to culture. But I moved around a lot out of region. I grew up in Unalaska and also in Anchorage, and then lived abroad for a lot of years for school. And then the next category is biological. So according to the original INCSA requirements, I am less than 1/4 blood quantum from a Bristol Bay tribe. So I wouldn't have qualified in those original parameters. And so that's from my mom's side, and my relatives on that side are mixed race with Scandinavian and Alutiiq. And my father's family is from the Netherlands. And then legally, card carrying, enrolled to Naknik Native Village, shareholder of BBNC through gifting, and Alaska Peninsula Corporation through gifting as well. So that's a lot, but it kind of gives a breadth of kind of what we're dealing with this topic. So lots of parameters around what we call our identity. So yeah, I guess I'll hand it over. Casa, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. You might have to give me some prompts along the way, but I'll do my best. Chmai, I'm so grateful to be here. I just first want to take a moment to center myself, acknowledge my ancestors, the ancestors of the lands that I'm in now, and the traditional homelands in Alaska. I come to this time in a good way in my heart to connect, and I hope that this conversation honors the work that has been done before us, and continues to do that work. Culture is dynamic. So, okay, firstly, socially was an identity marker, and I'm glad we're doing it this way because identity is such a big thing. Okay, so I am Casa, and my Alutiiq heritage is maternal, so it's from my mother's side. My mother is Kimberly Light. Her maiden name is Keck. My grandmother is Mary Oswin, and my great grandmother is Katya Andre. I am removed from the homelands. I've actually never been to the Bristol Bay region. My mother was adopted, and I grew up in the traditional homelands of the Laktamish people, the Coast Salish tribe, also known as Lummi, in the state of Washington, in a little archipelago called the San Juan Islands. Harmony, what was the next one? Biological? Okay. So
Yeah, with genetics.
okay, so biologically, like most folks, I have a pretty ornate makeup. I think we all kind of have different bloodlines informing who we are biologically, but to just talk from Sugpiaq heritage, I am also less than a quarter blood quantum. Sorry, the quotations gives me away, doesn't it? And lastly, it was legally. So I am an enrolled tribal member of the Chignik Lake Village, which is where my family is, my Alutiiq family is from. And I also have a lot of European descent, and I have Russian heritage as well. Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you. Samuel?
I love how you hedge things with that, by the way, because I think that gets to the heart of exactly what we're about to talk about, and I can't wait for all of us to just pop off. I'm a note taker a lot of the times with a lot of the stuff I have to do. So in considering the introduction, I hope you guys don't mind if I'm not maintaining eye contact or anything. I just want to make sure I hit all the points that I had written out. So my name is Samuel Hratzka. I'm the son of Tom and Vanessa Hratzka, grandson of Ken and Claire Hratzka, as well as Wilson and Jacqueline Sosi. I was born and raised in Anchorage. Similar, well, I guess in the most urban of ways, similar to Harmony in terms of grew up fishing with my family, and that's maintained itself as a key part of my life, even though I work here out in DC. And I think it's really, we can get into this later, depending on what people wish, but you know, my passion for federal Indian law and policy, that's kind of kept me or given me an entry point into this continued relationship with my communities and my cultures. And that gets to kind of the second point here, whether or not, you know, I'm Alaskan Native and American Indian. So I can't really divorce myself from either of those two sides as I look at my ancestry or as I look at the different cultures I'm a part of. And so in keeping both of those things alive by being out here in DC, where Congress has that plenary power, it is a constant thing at the forefront of my mind as to that relationship that I have, whether it's with my family based out of Ecuk on my dad's side, whether it's through my mom's side, Big Bend Rancheria in California, or Fish Point on the Navajo Nation Reservation. It's something that is always consistently present, not only in the work that I do, but also in the relationships I uphold and the things that I like to invest my time in. That said, on the second point, biological, you know, I inherently also, Casa, I also have a real difficulty with including ideas of blood quantum and subscribing to that model, recognizing, at least in my particular case, that one of the different, I think about them as threads, one of the different threads that I get to pull on, and I'm fortunate and proud to do so, is to be Winnemem-Wintu, which is not a federally recognized tribe, was a federally recognized tribe until the termination era. So from that ancestry and that side of things, how would that impact the amount of Indian blood that I might have? And that's one thing that, again, I consistently think about. That said, similar to the rest of the folks on the call here, you know, I'm also, as you might be able to see from my last name, I'm Japanese. I'm Ashkenazi Jewish through my mom. And I'm a whole bunch of other things too, Belgian and a lot of other European ancestry as well. To get to the legal side of things, kind of building off of the biological viewpoint that I have, you know, I carry the CIB, of course, questionable as I might consider that from time to time. I'm in process of enrolling myself with the Navajo Nation. Again, one of the different threads that I can pull upon. Chugyung and BBNC shareholder, and similar to you, Harmony, I also received a scholarship through, at the time, BBNCEF. So that's kind of a lot of different things we could touch on all at once, but that's me. Glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you both for sharing. That's all. Yeah, that's quite a lot in those three categories. Yeah, I guess I just kind of want to start off by maybe sharing experiences that we've had with identity. Like, I guess I'll start off with myself. I lived in Iceland for 2 years during my master's school, and trying to explain these concepts to Icelanders or other Europeans, I found very, very challenging. And then during that process, I came back to Bristol Bay and was a camp counselor at the culture camp that was recently put on. So for the last 2 years with the Education Foundation at the time. And so being in that group of people on the land and feeling like the belonging there and seeing the high school kids go through that as well, I think that's kind of what inspired me on this like identity journey. And I was longing to feel that sense of belonging through it. So yeah, anyways, that's just one experience, but if anyone has any points off of that.
I think you really struck a nerve with me when you were talking about, and in a positive way, in terms of being inspired through the work that you do, but the distance that you have, right? I mean, again, born and raised in Anchorage, my first time in region was actually last year through work. And it was a very, I was hoping it would be more of a cathartic experience than it was. You know, you kind of build it up in your mind. And I didn't know about the opportunity at the time to have the culture camp. I wish I could still take advantage of it. I've aged out, unfortunately, but it was just something I had always thought about as to, okay, well, what's it going to be like to smell the air and walk the ground and see everything from a plane, but also be able to taste it in the foods. And I just built it all up in my mind, whereas it's just oftentimes so much something that you live with and you exist within. And that's part of the greatness of it to me. So when I think about that experience and how I built it up for so long growing up in Anchorage, being distanced from my family as I did, I think I was similarly invigorated in terms of coming back to my work. But my initial starting point, I have to give all credit to my mom, because I really came to realize through her tenacity and encouragement that it was excruciatingly clear eventually this discrepancy within an inequity of opportunity that was afforded to other folks from marginalized communities or disadvantaged communities and the general populace. And I saw that within the school environments that I had when I was younger and the general population that I existed within outside of school. And so I became more invested in federal Indian law and policy as a way to kind of correct that scale. Ideally, in my case, from within these broader institutions that have historically, as you both know, exercised this oppressive framework over time towards folks who have Indigenous descent. So that's kind of, it seems similar in a way to what you were saying, Harmony, in terms of that consistent presence in your life, difficulty of explaining it to other people, but a consistency of purpose.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm like just taking deep breaths over here. It's really an honor to get to have this discussion. In fact, I've really called this in the last year of my life of just wanting to talk to other people that are like me. And then when I say like me, I mean in this kind of like in between space. I could fit in so many boxes. I don't always feel like I fit in any box. Listening to you both talk actually kind of just brings me to sort of one of my main driving points for this entire conversation on Native identity, and that essentially an experience that I have across the board and I've had for as long as I can recall is like imposter syndrome. It's like, you know, it doesn't matter really who I'm with and when I say that, I mean like, is it more of a Native crowd or a non-Native crowd or whatever. If I'm with Native people, I often am concerned that I'm not Native enough to fit in, or I don't have the background, I don't know enough, I don't know traditional ways enough, don't know the language. When I'm with non-Native people, often I'm like, I should be wearing my beaded earrings. I should be being more native. I should seem more native. I should be playing the role because they sure think that I'm really native. But inside of myself, sometimes I'm thinking, am I enough? I think that a lot of that comes from that experience of imposter syndrome comes from the removal. Assimilation has been so exacting in our family. And yeah, I guess it's been successful with my mother's adoption out of state and into a non-native family, whom I very much love. These are my grandparents. These are my aunts and uncles as well, white people. But there is this sort of disconnection that is so deep and comes from so far down in our ancestral line. And yeah, I guess just to kind of keep it brief, because it's such a deeply emotional thing for me. I think that that's where it comes from. That imposter syndrome is just not ever having any connection to any of the culture. It's been so far removed from me, but yet I've always been like categorized as Native. Through childhood, they always checked that on my forms. I was Alaskan Native. My mother knew that she was Alaskan Native. And by some stroke of good fortune, well, strong family ties, even though she had a closed adoption, there were aunties and uncles that kept tabs enough that when the ANCSA enrollment happened, she at a very young age was enrolled into the corporation. And so she's always received shares, but she has had no connection to any cultural or traditional practices or to the homelands. And so I think that just carried on through me. Well, you're Alaskan Native, but what does that mean? You know, there was kind of an emptiness there. And so as I've made my way on this path to reconnection, yeah, I always kind of feel a little out of place. That's my truth.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And like I was taking deep breaths too, because I could feel that very deeply as well. And that imposter syndrome, and also like the identity code switching, that it's like, oh, if I'm in a white space, I need to dress this way, or maybe I should express a Native identity through some other things, but never really feeling, yeah, settled, I guess. And I think for me that comes with, yeah, the childhood experiences of like, I feel like I was lucky to grow up fishing, but then it's like for people that, like my mom who grew up in the village, it's like, oh, well, you're kind of like a city girl, you know, growing up in Anchorage most of the time. And yeah, it made me reminded of this very acute experience I had at a conference a couple of years ago, and it was in Iceland. I was talking about being Alaskan Native, and this person like stood aback and was like shocked. They're like, "But you don't look like it," and I was like, "Well, what is a Native person supposed to look like?" and they couldn't answer very well. I'll blame it on European ignorance, but they're like, you know, like Inuit. And at that moment, you know, you just can't explain all of these frameworks that we're under as Native people or as mixed race people too. Like how is that going to occur in a 5-minute passing conversation? And then it's like immediately triggering. So yeah, and then I'll just share one more story too while I'm at it. And that I did my thesis work on food sovereignty because I wanted to come back home and be connected to the food that I felt was connected most to my identity. And so I gave a presentation on it at my Icelandic university, and the professor stopped me mid-presentation. He's like, so just wondering why you care because you're white. And, just it's so shocking that it's like you don't know really what to do with that. So yeah, I guess those are my sharings on that. Know if anyone
Can I
else
hop
has
in here with, I know you're supposed to be leading the conversation, Harmony, but that, again, that similar types of things, it's just a different, for me, it was a different conference. And, I was in a position of leadership for this particular one, and then some folks came up to me afterwards, and they're in their regalia, and I don't recall exactly how much regalia I was in or not in, what I was looking like, but they were quite proud to be who they were outwardly. And as much as I am too, I'm used to doing that code switching culturally in a number of different ways, whether it's from the things that I wear to the way that I speak to the different things that you're able to say and the ways that you're even able to joke with folks. I feel like that can be different, and the amount of teasing you're able to get away with. But in this particular case, I remember I was sharing just a little bit more about myself, and again, these different threads that I'm, again, proud to pull on. And they stuck with one, this particular person, and said, well, you're not from, like, you can't trace it, you can't trace your family back to like this particular scope of geography, so you're not us. And it just like flat, like cut flat like that. And then just kind of, I was like, I was so shocked and appalled that somebody within this broader community who, again, the community I've always been proud to say I'm a part of, and that my family has always been proud to be a part of, and that it's been drilled into me. It's like, this is who you are, and this is, as you are, you will be accepted in that space. And it really cut deep to me at that moment. And it's still, as you guys might be able to see, is kind of frustrating to relive that conversation and hearing that and knowing that that person legitimately felt that there was nothing wrong in saying that to me, and that was the right thing to say. And it just was so indicative, I believe, of these different ways in which folks can kind of describe an in-group and an out-group. And that's almost exactly, to bring it back around to the conversation, I feel like what Blood Quantum is about is that in-group and out-group, and the difficulties and tension that's everlasting between that was applied from an external factor, and that folks have to live with and embrace or not embrace and have their own struggle with. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here through all of our experiences. Shucks, we've all just said 3 different ways of how we didn't have fun.
Yeah. No, I guess I think these are, I don't want to put a label on it, but at least for me, these experiences are, I guess, the byproducts of like assimilation. Like I feel that maybe it would be easy for me just to lose that Native identity. Or I don't know. I think that's tricky when it comes to the way people present or the way people look. And yeah, I guess in thinking about the future, I've been contemplating a lot of like, what would I want like for my kids? And hopefully they wouldn't have these same experiences. So I guess kind of turning the page and like, what are you guys looking for in the future?
If you've got something on the tip of your tongue, Samuel, please feel free to take it.
I think that I want for my kids the same thing that I want for myself at the moment, and the same thing I want for everybody on the call. And that's for them to feel comfortable in their own skin as they are, to have equal access or opportunity to everybody else without having to wonder or even have a possibility of choosing a relationship based upon somebody's ancestry and that being a consideration in their mind. I'd like them to not have to go through a calculus to, or consider that other people might be going through a calculus within their minds as to how connected you might be to yourself and to your family and to your culture, that you can just exist within the world and be comfortable in your own skin. That's what I hope for my children. And I hope that they would be accepted and be able to exist in a world where that same calculus isn't run through the minds of other people, where they can be judged for the value that they bring to the table and for the relationships that they maintain and that they carry themselves in a good way. That's what I hope for myself.
Yeah, I love that. That is in alignment with how I feel. I have an almost 2-year-old daughter, Ember Moon, and so much of this cultural renaissance in my own life, if I'll say it that way, just this coming home, this remembering. I do it in her name. I do it because from what I've learned, what I think I'm beginning to truly believe is that I can take a big bite out of ancestral trauma in my very one generation. With my lifetime. I went to the Northwest Indian College for a while. I love them. They helped me so much on my path. There was a class I took once, and there was a Saanich elder there, and Saanich is like the Vancouver Island in that area. She was saying something that really stuck with me, and that was that, like, what we can do is for our children as we can do everything we can to prevent them from feeling that harsh break in their culture. I'm so pleased to hear that you both grew up fishing, that you both grew up with traditional ways close to you. That wasn't my experience, but I'm living my life in a way that I try to base so much of what we do in our family around subsistence and around place-based identity. I don't live in Alaska. I do hope to pilgrimage there. And Samuel, I'm going to take to heart what you said about the homecoming experience, not to get too many expectations about what that might do for me, but just living here where I do, there's so many opportunities to live with the land and to live in harmony with nature. And I am doing that, learning things that I was never taught. I'm learning them in hopes to give those to my daughter so that as she grows, these things are just a part of her identity. They're a part of who she is. And I think that what the Saanich elder was speaking to is this is how we heal that trauma, is that we just create this bridge for them to be a part of it, to already be included in these ways of being and living. I'm also attending school right now at the Kodiak College, learning the Alutiiq language. I think that language is a container for our culture. And I may never become a very fluent speaker, and I might always be a little bit clunky and clumsy, but how great if Ember can speak some just simple, basic conversational things at a young age, and maybe catch a different perspective or have a shift in the way she sees the world because she is being exposed to a different way of saying things and therefore a different way of being. And I guess, yeah, it's just creating that bridge. There's been a huge break for all of us in our own ways of how we're removed, and bringing us closer and bringing us back in is what I'm doing for her and all the children of her generation and all the descendants to come.
I love that. Yeah, like getting a native name and learning just how to do that introduction, like it's so healing. And I think that that's what I'm working on now, is like that the healing component of all that is there, of the shame, so that this next generation doesn't have to feel that. And it just reminded me of Pauline, one of our elders at the culture camp, a Denaima elder. She said both years in a sharing circle to the kids, she's like, you should be so proud to be Alaska Native. And it brings like so much emotion to me even now, because I think speaking those words, like we need to hear that, because we're not often told that, or at least like in the generations of my family, it was like how to kind of get away from the Native identity, to, I guess, be closer to power that was at the time, maybe, or just who they fell in love with. I don't know. But yeah, I think that healing work is so important, and bringing the multiple identities together and being a whole person. And that was kind of the theme too of our last year at Culture Camp. And so, yeah, I guess that's my hope for the future too, that we can be full people and not having this split. When I'm with these people, I have to be like this. When I'm like, I just want to show up 100% harmony in any situation that I'm in. So I guess that's the next like question that I'll pose to you both, and that like, what makes you feel that wholeness, and like brings you back to that grounded feeling? I can say an example too. Like for me, it's cutting fish. And I know that my ancestors have done that forever. Or sharing food. It doesn't even have to be native food, but maybe a sprinkling of native food in there.
I would say for me, I find my center in observing and honoring interconnectedness, and whether that be through ritual or ceremony, or again, I bring it back to like the seasonal shifts of just observing nature, of recognizing how everything plays on everything else. It's all there. And so when I need to feel that that feeling, I lean into that. I lean into how everything is connected, and I look for that connection. I look for all those things, how they all dance together, I guess. And that gives me a feeling of wholeness. I'm also, starting to do a lot of work with all of my ancestry. Samuel, you spoke so eloquently about it, but we're a tapestry of so many threads. We are made of so many things. And I started going to a tribal college. I did my genealogy. Man, I felt like I almost had a free pass to like, I'm just Indian now. Like I could just ride with that. Like that's all I have to claim. That's all I just really gotta take that direction. And I'm safe, I'm clear, I know who I am. But that quickly became obvious to me that isn't all of who I am. That isn't the whole me. In fact, there's ancestors in my lineage that I don't know, but I'm sure exist, that maybe need light shined on them, that they weren't the most upstanding characters, and they're not the people that I want to romanticize and put on my altar. And you know, be so grateful for the way that they were in their lives. But I think it's honoring that I'm comprised of all of these pieces, and there are people, there are ancestors in my lineage that need the healing. They need the recognition of what happened and in their lifetime. And so I guess just like not cherry picking who I am, but owning it, even if there's a shadow to it. I often hear in in classes at the tribal college I went to, it could easily, conversations could go to this idea of like, the white man is killing the salmon, for instance, like this kind of dialogue. And that always just like grated on me, because in a Washington state, we use a lot of like hydroelectric power. We get it from dams, and we all use electricity. I mean, that's just the culture we live in. The culture we live in is we use electricity. So you can't really remove yourself from the fact that you're using electricity from a dam that is messing up, you know, salmon habitat. You can't pick and choose like when you are a part of it and when you're not. And so it can be very humbling to just accept that I too am a part of something that isn't always just the rosy side, or isn't the side that's always been oppressed. I have a smartphone like many people here that, you know, there are conflict minerals. There is cultural genocide. There's true genocide that's occurring to mine these minerals. And I have a smartphone and I use it. And so to only talk about the fact that I and my ancestors are the victims of genocide, which is totally a true statement, is not embracing holistically who I am as a person, because I also am stuck in the machine that is still perpetuating these kinds of travesties. So definitely humbling myself makes me more whole. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
I feel like to tie together both what you just said, Casa, and what Harmony mentioned earlier about the importance of also having pride. I feel like I'm walking that knife edge almost every day, right? Of like, I got like my family's behind me. I'm so grateful for them. My community's behind me. I'm so grateful for them. And being like, wait a minute, at the end of the day, if I'm going into it and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm all that, like there's a lot that I'm missing, and there's a lot that I'm being ignorant about. And that's just leads to my downfall every single freaking time. And so to take total stock of myself, it's exactly what you're saying, Cassie. You stole the words exactly out of my mouth. Different threads, one tapestry. And to exist within that, I think about it almost as if you're, in my case, I love to play basketball. It's one of the things I do to decompress. But if you're going through a free throw and you think about all of the particular things, the small things that go into shooting that shot while you're shooting the free throw, I don't know about y'all, but 9 times out of 10 for me, I miss. It's those things that I do that are more or less natural to myself. If I've done them because I've just repeatedly done them forever, or I do them because they were born into me through my family and through these different threads that I have within my life. Those are the things that I feel like are most me. And they take stock of all of those different things that I am, all of that history that I have within me, all of those different threads that I can pull. And whether that's if I'm back home and I'm out in the water in my chest waders and I've got the gloves on and I feel the top of the water with my hand and I pray after I take a fish in, that's one thing. And if I've got my hiking boots on and I'm sitting at the top of the mountain, dangling my feet over it, looking out over the massive land in front of me and just being grateful for being a living person existing, maybe not necessarily in harmony because I still have my phone on me, but existing in that moment and taking full stock of that, that's one thing. And if it's being removed from all of those things, all of which that I love, and being here in DC and hanging out with my friends and sharing with them the smoked salmon that my family gratefully sends down to me every once in a while, that's another thing. it's all of those things combined though, and it's not necessarily one over the other, but it's the sum of all of those parts in which I feel whole within myself. And I think it's exactly what you guys were saying, of trying to balance all of those things at the same time. And the weights are different for all of us because of the different things that we've gone through and the responsibilities that we have. But ultimately, I think in answering that question that you originally posed, Harmony, that's to me where I feel most at peace and calm and true to myself.
Thank you both. Yeah. Just taking a second to absorb all of it. But yeah, I guess coming back around, it's like, I think a narrative that I encountered like when I left Alaska a lot was like the idea of Native Americans or Native Alaskans being these people like removed from society, but we are very much like in the modern world. We're existing regular people. And I think there was like this disconnect versus like the 1800s history book and like the living person in front of people. And so I bringing it back around to, I guess, our host here and decisions that the corporation is going to make coming up, like, I guess how do we exist in this modern framework with monetary compensation tied to our identity, with shares opening it up to descendancy. And I guess, I don't know if I can say toxic narrative, but I guess the toxic narrative of like people, oh, I just want to do this claim because then I'll get money. And I think it's like this, yeah, I guess Dr. Worrell summed it up well in saying that ANCSA, the Native leaders, wanted it to be we're in control of our lands, but Congress wanted it to be a method of assimilation into the Western culture with private property and monetary compensation tied to that. So yeah, I guess I am curious on both of your thoughts into the future of our generation and the next tied to these monetary decisions.
I can go first on this one. A lot of anytime you deal with policy work really in Alaska, there's a lot of thought that's put into land. And it's, I took this class when I was in undergrad called Western Legal Tradition. And one of the things that you learn pretty quickly in that class is there's a lot tied within Western legal tradition to private property and to the idea of property and ownership and title. I think as Alaska Natives, over the past few generations, and admittedly my conceptions of these different really big, contentious conversations, it's still in formation, and it's been in formation for a while. So my responses could change in like 5 years. But my conception of it now is during those first few years of ANCSA's rollout, and even in the land selection process, there was a consistent set of compromises made within and amongst regions about lands to be selected. Do you go for things that are more of greater monetary value? Do you go for things that alternatively might have lesser potential future monetary profit, but that are known great places of subsistence? Do you go for places that are near to your centralized communities or further away? I feel like those same conversations have always been in flux ever since they initially started. And that's for a number of different reasons, whether it's for the federal government's time to time lack of conferring all of the lands that are due to not only ANCs, but also to the state and other entities? Or is it just because of who we are and what we identify collectively within our communities as needs for our communities, needs for our people. So I don't really see that changing over the course of my lifetime, but I see the conversations potentially becoming a bit more strained as we have a continued outmigration from our rural communities to our more urban communities. I can see that being a potential great source of conflict. And I think that the continued presence of those two provisions, 7I and 7J, are also going to fuel certain consternation. But it is something that I guarantee you that is thought about not only within our local and regional circles, but across the state and really across the country.
Yeah, it's really insightful. And I'm going to piggyback on the fact that our opinions could change. And I think that if we're doing this thing, this life thing, right, then our opinions do change, because over time we gather more data and we have more perspective. And so it's sort of our job to continue to change. I opened my introduction with the fact that culture is dynamic. People are dynamic. We're not static. We don't stay the same. Harmony, you touched on the romanticizing aspect of, Native American culture and how that sometimes affects us when we don't look the part. I think we just have to recognize that things change. I have, as so many of us do, so much respect and reverence really for the decisions that our ancestors had to make. All Native people, all Indigenous people across the world through time, but specifically the Americas, Alaska, they had to look out as far as they could in the future to find out how to protect our lands and our ties, our relations with the world and with each other. And then they had to send us through that keyhole, this tiny little pin of light that they could see. They had to try to sign treaties in languages they didn't understand, make arrangements, make agreements, start corporations, which is the antithetical thing of Native culture as far as being in it together, pulling together in the same boat. A corporation doesn't exactly fit that bill, and yet they did what they saw was the best they could do with what they had to work with. And I respect that. And I think that for the most part across the Americas and Alaska, they did a really great job. They didn't have the distractions that we have, and they had an encompassing perspective, and they had a relationship with nature that not very many of us have, and they were able to get us here. And for that, I am infinitely grateful. And then I think also it is now our job to pick up that torch. It's our job. It is our responsibility to them and to our descendants to do that same work and to look out ahead as far as we can, just like they did from where they, I just think of this thing in my head, like an arrow being shot out. They shot us out as far as they could from where they saw, but now we're here where that arrow landed, and now we get to shoot an arrow. And I think that we just need to continue to do that work and make shifts and changes that apply to who we are as a people now and in this day and age. And it's different than what it was then. It's got to keep moving. We got to keep moving. We got to keep moving.
Yeah, I love this arrow metaphor. It's a great way to think about it. Yeah, and I guess we can maybe just have our closing thoughts coming up, and then we open it up to some of the questions that I've been seeing pop into the chat. But yeah, I guess I've been having a lot of conversations with my family lately about this, and overall the sentiment felt like I feel the blood quantum system is ultimately harmful, like at this time. I guess there needs to be a distinction of who is Native and who isn't, but that is traditionally through like lineal descendancy. And I was quite shocked by the data in the last talk about that 59% of Sea Alaska shareholders are less than 1/4. But it almost felt like I was being seen in that too. And I'd be really curious to hear from the Bristol Bay region what that is now. But I think for me in the corporation status, it's like opening it up to descendants and making a culture where the longing is the central component of like, please come back to our region, and how do we build up our people in a way that is non-exclusionary and saying that you belong here instead of, I don't know, what I've experienced of being worried about showing up in a Native space and where I'm not known, and people being like, oh, who's this white girl, you know, showing up. So just feeling that sense of like, please, you can come home, and we want you to come back to the region or serve in whatever capacity. But yeah, I guess those are my closing thoughts if you guys want to take it away.
I'll give it a whack. Well, I wanted to be brave enough to say it today. I wanted to be brave enough to say that blood quantum is a tool of genocide. There it is. I'm gonna put that out there. That is my belief. That is how I feel. I believe it is a tool for oppression. It is a tool that was mastermind for eradication and for division. And I don't think that maybe all of those things were known at the moment of inception, but I think that some of them were. And the idea of it, assimilation, kill the Indian, not the man, that was the name of the game when these kinds of policies came into play. So I firmly believe that blood quantum is a tool of oppression and it does not serve us, and that we need to make changes for our future if we're going to continue to be a people and be sustainable and bring people home and make people feel included. Blood quantum is not what makes us Native. And I think is it Sea Alaska that they have their hashtag or their movement thing is like Native enough. I think is something that they say, but that is something that I've held dear. I just, ever since I saw that, like, I am Native enough. I am Native. I am a Native woman. This is me speaking from that place of that imposter syndrome. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. This is what it thinks like, and this is what it does. And I want to see us move away from the blood quantum model in all ways. I think that there's other ways for us to protect our heritage and our culture and bring inclusion. I also wanted to speak in a very vulnerable way about my own experience with shares and being on the outside looking in as a new Native or someone that was born after, enrollment was closed for being in a corporation, being a shareholder. There's so much identity around that in Alaska. In the lower 48, there aren't corporations, so it's not the same. Being a tribal member is where you gain a lot of that feeling of inclusion. And I think that happens a lot more as a shareholder. My mother was an original shareholder, and this is an emotional topic for me, but I want to be candid and I want to share my story because I think this is the transparency that heals. My mother dealt with a lot of trauma, as you can imagine, being adopted, being disconnected, very much looking native, but being non-native in every other respect. She's dealt with a lot of issues that have left our relationship rocky. And I know that that's not just our story. It came time for me to go to school. It came time for me to have this remembering and realizing who we are and where we come from. And my immediate sense was this call to action to become involved, to find out how can I serve my community? How can I become a part of this again? I'm destined for this. This is who I am. So how do I join the club? How do I really show up and be a part? And it turned out gifting, as you all know. With my mother alive, I needed to be gifted. And when I asked my mother for one share so that I could be considered for scholarships before the Education Foundation opened that to Descendants, she denied me that. And she denied me that out of fear. She denied me that out of her need because she depends on it, economically. She depends on these shares. And I understand that. And I respect that, where she's coming from. And I think in some ways it is unfair to ask her to relinquish some of that security or some of what makes her feel like she belongs when she knows so little about her traditional culture. And yet then I see the division it's caused. Even though I can have that wider perspective, I am hurt by this. This makes me sad. I'm struggling with the reality that my mother and I can't find that connection, that we can't. And then I see the division. I see the divisive nature of keeping Descendants from being a part of their people, being a part of their tribe in this way. And it's not how it's intended. It's not how, I just feel it in my heart. I feel it in my spirit. It is not the intention of this system to be this way and to create this kind of division. And so I share this story, not looking for sympathy because it's all going to be okay, because I'm on this path, but because it deserves light. It deserves to be aired. It deserves to be known that there is this break in family. And I just can't believe I'm the only person dealing with this, or the only family dealing with these kinds of sort of icky feeling issues when you get the money involved and you get things like that. We all just belong together. And I don't have the answer to how that happens, but I want to share my story. I want to speak about this, not to complain, but to create that collaboration and create that community and say, hey, like, what's going on with this? Like, how can we work together to make something different so that everybody feels safe and comfortable and can work through the stack of historical trauma that we all, to some degree, are carrying forward. So I appreciate having a platform here and a safe space to share that. It's a very vulnerable thing to just put it all out there like that. And I really do appreciate having the space. So thank you for hearing me.
There were some times in school where somebody would have a really great presentation and I would think to myself afterwards, because I'd be the next person up, I have to go after that. And I think this is kind of one of those things. In a lot of the work that I do, that there's a lot of problems, as we all know, that exist in this world. And I think that generally problems are easier to identify than solutions. When it comes to this, I think that there's a lot of people, myself included, who see it as a problem. When it comes to solutions, that's where things get a little bit, where the laundry gets a bit dirtier even. Because if you have something tied to descendancy, well, are you going to have 5 generations down the line somebody who lives halfway across the world who may not have any interest in our communities, who then suddenly through some monetary value seeks to establish that connection if only for a monetary purpose? Is that right? For an inclusivity, exclusivity thing, is that wrong? Those are questions I don't have the answers to, but I think they deserve to be posed because those are the potential pitfalls that I could see being raised in a pure descendancy model. Whereas then to try and counteract that, you can go into all of these different rabbit holes of to try and counteract that. If somebody lives half a world away, but they clearly have an interest in our communities, in our culture, in who we are, and they seek to pull on this thread, who would I be to say that they don't deserve it if they're willing to put in the effort to connect with their communities and to the greatest extent that they have possible, to the greatest extent that they're able to? Is it then right for me to say that no, you're still not worthy of being in community with me and with my descendants? Again, those are questions that I don't have the answers to. But I think that it's been the eternal pitfall of these ideas around blood quantum, particularly when it comes to laws like MMPA that exclusively rely on blood quantum in certain cases. To look to an alternative to that incurs all of these other devils in the details conversations, these harder conversations where it's easy to get really impassioned, because I think it's so easy for all of us to just look at the problem and say it's, oh, Marine Mammal Protection Act. Sorry. It's just conversations that if we are to look to a different model and we are to look towards implementing it, that I believe are going to have to be held as well. And I think that one of the things that I'm really encouraged by through this conversation is that we're willing to have those conversations, or we're willing to get there. And that's a big point of pride for me, because it also shows that, as I mentioned earlier, we're embracing the best of ourselves and bringing the most of ourselves to those conversations. And we all agree that they deserve to be held. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about this forum, because it's allowed us to air that out. I look forward to having those conversations. I think it's about time.
I agree. I'm so thankful to the Bristol Bay Foundation for bringing this group together. And yeah, thank you both for allowing me to facilitate this conversation. And it's definitely, one of many that will be needed to happen over these next few years in these decision-making times. And yeah, it's not going to be solved overnight, but I think one idea that I came up with as a solution is hopefully a young adult culture camp, maybe in the works, because I know so many people of our similar generation and ages are really longing for this type of space in a more informal way, and just bringing us all together out to Alaska and having time to discuss these important topics, but also have good food and good laughter together. So looking forward to that. If there's any other questions, I think we have a couple more minutes. I'm seeing one comment here in the chat, the last one, about a lunch program and not being able to participate in the Kenai Peninsula Tribe activities. And yeah, I think that is like another topic that is pretty tricky too, when it's tribes of different regions, but we're living in that region as guests upon the land. Maybe that's a conversation for another one of these webinars, but I don't know if you both have any thoughts on this comment.
I just can speak to the fact that I have lived in the Lummi Nation my entire life, and I'm so grateful for their generosity. The tribe has taken care of my sisters and my mother and myself, covered us with medical and dental and behavioral health. And the Northwest Indian College is here at the Lummi Nation that I attend school. My sister does. I felt so grateful for the inclusion, even as I've had to sort of unpack and discover my own heritage and identity that comes from Alaska. And so it's really hard to hear a story, to read a story like that, and to know that that is happening, where again, that division, that like living in this economy of this like lack economy of resources, or that we would ever turn away others. I just want to speak that on the other side of that there are times when, even questioning my own Native identity, I have been welcomed into the homeland, the tribes of the homelands that I'm living on now. So it can kind of go both ways. There's a fella here, another actual tribal member from Saanich up north of us, and he talks about how we're all pulling in the same canoe now. He always uses that metaphor, and this idea that it really doesn't matter our identity. Essentially, I'll extrapolate that we're like all earthlings. If I had $1 for every time somebody'd ask me like, what are you, through my life because of how I look, we talked about that kind of in the beginning. It's just, I finally got a canned response. I always would say to people like, I'm an earthling. What about you? Like, what are you? So we just got to take care of each other no matter where we are. And that's hard sometimes. And yeah, I'm sorry to read that story. It hurts, there's so much disconnection. I also see in the comments someone asking what's MMPA, and I don't know that I'm familiar with that either. Samuel, would you be willing to expound on that?
Actually, I think Harmony might be better suited to explain it than I would be. I think you've actually given a lot more of your time to MMPA than I have. The Marine Mammal Protection Act. Harmony, again, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in marine mammals. I'll just say that I'm more of a fish person, but there's blood quantum, like you have to be at least 1/4 to be able to harvest marine mammals. And so I guess that opens up this whole Pandora's box of, well, if we can't hunt our traditional species, then that's a key connection to culture. And so then but then you're dealing with the federal resource management. So yeah, I think a topic for another webinar for Alaska Native hunting and fishing rights. I've been really involved in that in my resource management career. So yeah, I think I'll try to put a cap on that right now, because I could talk forever about this topic. But I can follow up with a link that we made of an animated video with me and my research group of the history of Alaska Native hunting and fishing rights in the state. So I think, yeah, I'll just follow up with that.
Cool video. I can say that much. And I think that there's a coastal living requirement too with MMPA, which is a wrinkle.
Yeah, I think it's like within 40 miles of the coast. Oh, okay. They're just chatting amongst themselves now. But I think that maybe we can just close it up here and just know that, yeah, it's an ongoing topic, and one that we should keep discussing. So thank you both for sharing today. I really appreciated this space and hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Such an inspiration to be here in this space with you two. I'm ever so grateful to have been invited and to get to meet you and chat with you in such a candid way about such hot topics. And yeah, thank you so much to Alicia and everyone at the BBNC and the Education Foundation. And yeah, heck yeah, let the conversations roll. Bringing our awareness to this is how we do it. So thanks again for giving me that positive, uplifting idea of how we're moving.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was really, really nice. I just wish we were in person. I could give you guys hugs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bayana.
Yeah, Koyana, everyone, and the Bristol Bay Foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you.